Hello and welcome. I'm Sherry Gupta, the Executive Director and founder of CultureALL, and we are right where we belong, a production of CultureALL, sharing cultures to elevate us all. We're so glad you've joined us. And here is our host, the popular, beloved, and esteemed Iowa News anchor woman, Mollie Cooney.
Sherry, thank you very much. And I did not send that for you to read, but I appreciate it. And it's so, I'm so overwhelmed to be a part of this. I've interviewed you for several years on KCCI talking about all your various events. So I am honored to be a part of this new venture in this new world we're trying to adjust to. So I will start by interviewing you for a little bit, and then we're going to move on to our first guest. And we're going to have a new guest every Tuesday night. So we're looking forward to this. But first of all, for people who are not familiar with CultureALL, you founded it. When and why?
Well, it was 2005, so about 15 years ago. And the reason why, it's mostly because I know the power of being exposed to other cultures, other ways of doing things, and how that impacts our lives.
How many cultures do we have in Iowa, in the metropolitan area now?
Well, there are about 120 languages that are spoken in central Iowa households.
So what does CultureALL do? You have ambassadors, right? And what do they do?
The cultural ambassadors create these amazing experiences based on their own passions, what they love about their culture, and they engage Iowans in discovery and learning about the cultures that live among us as our neighbors. They go into the schools, they go into libraries, workplaces, and just create authentic interactions that spark a curiosity so Iowans want to know more about other cultures.
What has been the response over the years?
Oh gosh, we serve 30,000 people on an annual basis. So the response has been really positive and it continues to grow, I think now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for all you have done over the years and will continue to do in the years to come. We obviously welcome people with an open arm, and you are the face of a movement that started so many years ago, and we look forward to what comes in the future. So now what we'd like to do is introduce our first guest tonight. And like I say, every week we're going to be interviewing someone else and hear their stories about what brought them to Iowa. And our first guest today is Tijana Kudumovic. And Tijana, thank you so much for joining us. And it's a story I understand you've never really shared. So take it away. Tell us what brought you to Iowa.
Mollie, I'm excited to be here. I find CultureALL fascinating, and I'm really excited to do this in conjunction with yourself as well. So I'll share a little bit about my story and how I came to Iowa. I was 6 years old when the Civil War in Bosnia broke out. My story is probably not very different from many other Bosnians my age. I feel fortunate that my memories are very limited of the time that I spent in Bosnia, as well as some of the occurrences that I lived through. I remember I have a few very vivid memories of leaving Bosnia, specifically the night that the bombing started. Our homes in Bosnia are a little bit different than our homes here in Iowa, so it's not very common that people have basements. And so the night that the war broke out, my family, along with other neighbors and friends, we actually gathered at my aunt's home. She was one that was closest by, and she had a basement, and so we took safety in that basement. We spread out across the floors of her basement, and we spent the night there and took shelter. It was a memory that I don't think I'll ever forget. As a child, hearing the bombings and being afraid, it's something that will stick out in my mind for a really long time. From there, I feel that my parents and other family members did an excellent job in actually sheltering us as children to ensure that we don't see some of the horrible things that occurred in our country.
Mhm.
I remember leaving my home. I remember that we packed, I think I pack a gateway bag for the weekend, and I think I pack more now than I actually took when I left my home. I think we were all under the impression that we would be gone for a few days, so we really packed just the basic necessities, and we thought we'll be back in a couple days. No big deal. There was, if you try to picture your neighborhood and picture semi trucks that are just lined up through your streets, and women and children are asked to board these semis to get to safety. As a mom, especially now thinking back, it's difficult to imagine and picture my children having to do something like that.
And how were your parents through this? How you have other family members? Were you scared? Were your parents comforting? I mean, you had no idea where you were going or for how long, as you said.
Yeah, my parents were very comforting, and I think, as a child, you don't necessarily always understand when your safety is at risk. I had a lot of cousins that were my age, and so to us, we were together, we got to play together. So at times, the safety wasn't really, I don't think that we were cognizant of how dangerous the situation was at the time.
What happened? You loaded onto the truck, so where did you go?
Yeah. So my family went to Croatia. We actually lived in a home that was abandoned. The family that lived there had moved out, and the community knew that the home was empty, so they offered the home to us, and we stayed in their home for a few months. I remember seeing pictures of the family around the house. It was, they just picked up and left, just like I picked up and left my home. I don't have a ton of memories of our time in Croatia. I remember one night specifically, very towards the end of our stay in Croatia, when the bombings actually started to occur there. I remember one night where we walked across the home that we were staying in and went to the basement, and I remember the bombings occurring, and then there was just silence, and it was very quiet. And I remember a knock on the door, and I remember how fearful everybody was because they didn't know who was on the other side of that door. And it happened to be a neighbor that knew that refugees were staying at the home, and he had stopped by to make sure that everybody was okay. But I remember feeling that fear.
Sure.
And I think that was possibly the very first time that I actually was conscious of the fear that I had, and of the unknown of what's on the other side of that door.
How long were you there? And then you went to Germany for a while.
I did. So I think it's so difficult to piece together the story
Sure.
because when you're in the midst of chaos, things aren't really planned. And so our families and our parents didn't really think that, well, we're going to go here this month and we're going to go here. It was just kind of word of mouth. You heard that people were successful in finding shelter and safety, and you tried to follow their path. And so my family tried to follow a number of paths, and I remember being at a bus station in Croatia, and we were waiting to load a bus that would take us to Slovenia, actually. And we had been there for a couple of days, and I remember one of the workers there had noticed my family, and he actually approached my mom, and he asked whether we had anywhere to stay. And she said that we didn't. And he had worked at a youth club, so he actually offered her the keys, and he took us to the youth club. And so he allowed us to spend the night there, and we were able to shower and kind of prepare to come back to the bus stop. And it just gives me hope that there's people out there who wanted to help. They might not have been completely capable of making a difference, but even the smallest actions such as his made a difference and left an impact for my family and I.
I can imagine. I can't imagine, but how wonderful that there are people like that. Were you ever harmed? Anybody in your family? injured in the?
Yeah, I personally wasn't. I did lose a couple of uncles during the war. So my cousins lost their dads, and that was a very difficult time for our whole family. After we left Croatia, my mom actually had recognized someone from our hometown, and he actually smuggled us into Slovenia. We were able to get there, and I think the most difficult part of all of the transitions was that every time that you left and moved from place to place, nobody could take an entire family. Nobody could take, my immediate family and take my aunts and my cousins. So every time that we moved, you were saying goodbye to your family again because you weren't sure whether they would make it to the same place that you were going to. So that was probably the most difficult thing, and the things that I remember the most was the goodbyes. So after we arrived in Slovenia, we were at a refugee camp there. We were initially at one refugee camp for a short period of time, and then we were moved to another camp, which was in Ajdovština, and we were actually reunited with my dad. So that was the first time that we were able to be together as a family, so that was a big deal to us. The conditions at the refugee camp, it was better than not knowing where to sleep, but they were definitely very difficult. As a child, the one memory that I have was we had community showers, and so you had a certain time that you needed to be there to take a shower. And so as a little girl, I was extremely terrified of having to go into this big place where adults and children showered. And thinking back to it now, I think our parents did great in trying to talk to the workers there to set aside different times for the children to go outside of when the adults were there to make it a little easier on us. There was no formalized schooling, and so parents actually made the curriculum for us. They wanted us to learn how to read and write, and they rotated of who would teach what. We all had assignments of what family would clean the floors that we stayed at so that we could keep everything clean and organized. I think I have a picture that I posted here of myself and my cousins inside of one of the rooms at the refugee camp. And the surroundings seem somewhat normal. If you're thinking of this is someone's bedroom, it has little toys in the background, it has posters up on the wall, but you shared this bedroom with lots of other people, and you had curtains that separated you to give you a little bit of privacy. I had a memory of when I first started kindergarten at the refugee camp, and my mom had she had worked and made some money, and so she actually made me breakfast the first morning that school started. And so it wasn't anything extra. It was eggs and bread and something, but it was homemade. And I remember I was running late and I was supposed to make it to class, and she said, "You need to hurry, you're going to be late." And I turned around and I said, "Who cares about being late when you have this kind of a breakfast?" So when I think now, I do. I remember that. And so now when my kids say, "Well, I don't like that. That looks gross," or, I probably give them the same story every time.
A mother is a mother, no matter.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
What brought you eventually to Iowa, and how old were you?
I was 12 years old when we came to Iowa. We actually had one more stop before we made it to Iowa. We actually left the refugee camp that we were at. My dad had paid someone to bring him to Germany, and he was able to actually pay a German citizen to sponsor my mom and I and my brother to be brought there so we could be together. We lived in Germany for 4 years. Unfortunately, we were not able to stay together as a family for a long period of time. We moved to Germany in February, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer in April, and he ended up passing away later that year. So the situation became a little more difficult for my mom.
That I can't imagine. Again, it is the hardships that your whole family went through, and you lost him, but then she had a connection to Iowa. Is that right?
She did. She had a cousin who actually lived in Ankeny, and she was kind enough to sponsor us. After the war ended in Bosnia, the German government, rightfully so, said, the war is now over. You may return back to your country and your home. Well, unfortunately, our home was damaged during the war, and we really didn't have anywhere to return. So our cousin here from Ankeny, Iowa, she sponsored us, and we were able to come to Iowa. I didn't really know. I mean, as a 12-year-old, I didn't really know where Iowa was. I didn't know what to expect. I remember going through the process of qualifying to be relocated. And I remember asking one of the workers what the nearest big city was. And so he said, well, I think it's Chicago. So every time somebody asked me where I was going, I said, oh, somewhere close to Chicago, because I wasn't really sure where that was. So I remember coming to Iowa. I remember how flat I thought it was. Even landing at the Des Moines airport, there wasn't any tall buildings, a lot of greenery, and a lot of cornfields, and it was tough. I wasn't really sure where I was going to end up. But we had a good experience in the resettlement process and coming to Iowa. It felt good to land here and see that a Bosnian community had started to establish themselves. We had folks from the Refugee Center that came and translated for us initially, to kind of help with getting settled in. We had an apartment right away, so we had a home where we belonged. Schooling was interesting. I didn't speak any English when I moved here, and so
I was going to ask about that. Yes.
Yeah, so I spoke German.
Wow, I mean,
it was difficult
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it was difficult for sure. I think the Ankeny School District did a really nice job. I had somebody in my class who was from Bosnia. Her family had relocated many years before, and so she helped. We didn't have any of the same classes, but they would call her if I would get stuck, and she would come translate. There was also a young man who was in my class whose parents were actually German, and so he spoke German. So I was able to kind of converse with him, which was very helpful. You know, kids are kids, teenagers are teenagers. Kids here didn't really know where Bosnia was. They didn't understand the war that's going on. They would ask questions like, oh, did you guys drive cars there? Did you wear shoes there before you moved here? Like they had no idea that it's actually, part of Europe, and that their parents or grandparents probably visited there as a tourist many years ago.
Yeah, that's true. What kind of support did you get within the Bosnian community then here?
The Bosnian community has been great. I think it's amazing, and it's so heartwarming for me to see all of the success that my peers, my Bosnian peers, as well as our parents are having. They were able to reestablish, they were able to build new lives, and that just speaks volumes to what the U.S. government has done for us as a community. I do have one person that's kind of been someone who I have really had a strong connection with. We had an ESL teacher, Mrs. Honig, that was assigned to all of the Bosnian kids within the Ankeny School District when we moved here, and she was put in charge of teaching us English. And so she was an English teacher, and she had retired and had taken this up as kind of a part-time job. It probably turned out to be more than a part-time job for her. We sure didn't give her an easy time. But I remember I think she did such a fantastic job, just not only teaching us the language, but trying to teach us the culture and trying to help us understand what certain meanings of things were. And she would always tell us when when we were hurt or somebody said something that was hurtful for us in school, she would always tell us not to, don't mind them. This is your home. This is where you belong. Their ancestors came just like you did, and you will make a life here for yourself. Don't let that bother you. And I think it really left an impact on me as a teenager, and as I as I was growing up and kind of establishing my life here in the Ankeny community, she stayed connected. She would reach out every time that I got a new job. She would make sure that, you know,
Great.
she knew what was going on in my life, and that was really, really important. And I think it's so important for others in the community, whether you are a neighbor, whether you work with someone, it's important to reach out and let them know that you enjoy having them part of your lives.
Very true. Now you have become a wife, a mother. Very quickly, how'd you meet your husband? And have you gone back to Bosnia?
Yeah. So my husband and I met. His family used to own a Bosnian restaurant in Des Moines called Tropic Bar and Grill, and I actually went there and enjoyed some of their food, and that's how I met him. We have two beautiful daughters. They're a handful, especially during this time, but we love them. And
have you taken them to Bosnia or shared your story with them? Because again, like as a mother, relating to what your mother went through when you were their age, I can't imagine what that feeling must be like for you.
Yeah, so I have only gone back once. It was kind of an emotional journey for me. I think thinking back, you have a lot of loved ones that you lost during the war, and especially losing my dad at the age that I lost him. I was never actually able to visit his grave. I wasn't able to be there for his funeral. So it was definitely a difficult journey back home. I haven't quite built up the courage to go back again, but I think I'm getting there. Now that my kids are a little bit grown and they do ask a lot of questions, they want to know where we're from, they want to meet extended family members. We're planning on taking them back and having them enjoy our culture and see where their parents came from.
That will be exciting. It'll be fun to follow up when you do that. How has this impacted now as an adult, how you relate to others within this community? What do you do as a profession other than a mom and wife? And how do you take it, share your story with others and make an impact here?
Yeah, so I'm a manager for John Deere Financial. I think when I thought about the employer that I wanted to work with, I wanted someone who gave back to the community that they served, and I feel that John Deere really does that, and they do it well. They encourage their employees to get involved, to serve on boards, to be volunteers, and that's really important to me. I'm actually very involved in the community. I'm a CASA, a court-appointed service agent. I serve on the board of CultureALL. This is the first time that I've shared my story, and I've shared it because I find CultureALL so important, and I want it to thrive. And I think that it takes more just than you, Mollie, and myself. And I wanted to do something extra to ensure that CultureALL continues to thrive and serve in our community.
Well, this is a very tough time for all of us, and financially wise, everybody, the whole world is changing, and I imagine that this is an impact on what you've gone through and gives you a different perspective of where you are now and how you can share your story. Are you going to do more reaching out?
I sure am. I think it's important. I think, you know, I have a fantastic platform to do that here, and I have a platform to ask others to join me in supporting CultureALL, whether it's a small donation, whether it's a large donation, anything that anyone can give makes a difference. If you can't give financially, make an effort to knock on a elderly neighbor's door to ask them if they're okay. Write a note to someone in your neighborhood, letting them know that it matters, that you're happy to have them, and provide your phone number. I think it's not everybody's on social media, not everybody is in tune virtually, so it's important to also provide other means of staying connected. So if you know someone who may not be on Facebook, give them your phone number, let them text you, let them call you if they need something.
Well, and you've been here 22 years, so I understand that has a special meaning for you and some goals you have coming up.
I do. So my goal in doing this has been to raise money for CultureALL, and my goal is to raise $1,022 for my 22nd anniversary of being here in Iowa. So if all my friends could donate $22, I would be super happy.
Well, we'll do what we can. And just one final thought. What has Iowa meant to you in relation to cultural, but just overall, the impact Iowans made for you and your family?
I think Iowa is home. I don't know that it requires any more than that, but Iowa has allowed me to build a home here and build a life for myself. And I will do whatever it takes, I think, for the rest of my life to give back to the community that offered me that.
Well, Tijana, as we said, this is right where you belong, and we're so thrilled that you use this platform to share your story. I hope your children appreciate your breakfasts and what you have to offer and what you bring our lives, because that's what this is all about, is learning about others and how different we are, but yet how much the same we are. And the struggles you have gone through that have made you who you are today, and how you are sharing that experience with others, we deeply, deeply appreciate. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
doing that.
Mollie.
Absolutely. And we want everyone to think about CultureALL. This is a rough time with everything changing here in the next few weeks. We don't know what to expect, but we're here. We're all going through this together, and we encourage you, if you do, as an audience, want to find ways to give back to the community, this would be a wonderful way. There is a link at the bottom. It is CultureALL's donation page, and it's, please consider giving a donation in honor of Tijana and all of her struggles and what she has gone through and how she has become a beautiful young woman today. And right now I'd like to bring Sherry back in, because this is just the first of many people we are going to meet over these next few weeks, and the impact that Iowa has made on them and the impact that they have made on Iowa. Sherry, I'm so glad Tijana used this as her first way to tell us what she has experienced in life.
It's been wonderful. And thank you, Mollie, for joining us. Thank you, Tijana Kudumovic. And thanks to all of you who are listening. In just a moment, I'll tell you who our special guest is next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. on CultureALL's Facebook live stream. Right Where We Belong is a production of CultureALL. Our technical producer and program director is Stacy Kimberlin. Our director of operations is Jesse Orton. Board members include President Paul Brown, Vice President Lorraine Harden, Secretary Whitney Ford, Treasurer Tina Johnson, and Nick Campos, Kavilash Chawla, Maida Hadzic, Anik Keel, Tijana Kudumovic, Michael Won, and the inspiration for Right Where We Belong, Marsha Wanamaker. Thanks so much to everyone who contributes to CultureALL. A special thanks goes out to Bravo Greater Des Moines, Wells Fargo, and the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs. I'm Executive Director Sherry Gupta, and now, who will you meet next Tuesday? The remarkable David Wollnerman, an Iowan who survived the concentration camps in both Auschwitz and Dachau in the early 1940s. We hope you'll join us again next week, right where we belong.